Welcome to Black Thread Mysteries, where the unseen meets the unexplained, and every story challenges what we think we know. Tonight, we step into a realm where life and death may not be final, where memories can outlive the body, and the soul might just find its way back. These are real reincarnation cases you won't believe actually happened. What if your child looked you in the eyes and said, "I remember my other mother"? Would you laugh? Would you panic? In the heart of Delhi, one such story refused to fade with time. A tale so strange, so disturbingly detailed, that even hardened skeptics found themselves silenced. This is the story of Shanti Devi, India's most famous and widely documented reincarnation case. In the 1930s, a young girl named Shanti began speaking of another life, one she claimed had ended violently. At the tender age of 4, she told her parents she had once lived in Mathura, had a husband named Kedarnath, and even bore a son. She insisted she wasn't their daughter at all, but someone named Lugdi Devi. Her parents thought it a childish fantasy, but the girl would not stop. Her descriptions grew more vivid, more precise, down to the house's layout, the people's names, and the town's narrow alleyways. Word spread quickly, reaching Mahatma Gandhi himself. A commission of respected scholars and investigators was formed to verify the girl's claims. When Shanti was taken to Mathura, her behavior shocked everyone. She led investigators directly to the home of her alleged former husband, without guidance. She recognized her in-laws. She called them by names no outsider would know. She even recognized her son and wept uncontrollably when she held him. The man she claimed to be her husband, Kedarnath, was shaken. Not only did she know details only Lugdi could have known, but she also recalled private conversations they'd shared before Lugdi's death in Childby. In the shadowed hills of Golan Heights, a young boy was born into a world that never expected him to carry ancient secrets. He was quiet, withdrawn, not in fear, but in focus. Before he could spell his name, he began to speak of things far beyond his years. He said he had been murdered, and he knew where his body lay. The Druze people of this region have long believed in the soul's rebirth. But even they were stunned when the child, at just 3 years old, led his family and local elders through winding paths to a forgotten village. With unwavering certainty, he pointed to a house and said, "That is where I lived before. That is where I died." More than just words, he described the man who killed him, his name, his face, even the tool he used. Skeptics gathered. Could a toddler really recall a death so vividly? They followed him as he walked across rough terrain to a patch of earth and declared, "My body is buried here." The villagers dug. Buried beneath the soil was a skeleton, skull fractured in the exact spot the boy claimed. But there was more. He pointed toward a nearby thicket and claimed, "The axe is there." With growing disbelief, they searched the spot. Rusted and decaying, an axe was indeed found, partially hidden by time and soil. The elders were no longer just intrigued. They were shaken. The man named by the boy was confronted. Pale and trembling, he denied it, but his past unraveled quickly. The details the boy had spoken matched local rumors of a man who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Faced with evidence and an eyewitness reincarnated into a child's body, the villagers reached their own verdict. The man eventually confessed to the crime. What made this case extraordinary wasn't just the detailed memories or the discovery of the body and weapon. It was the fact that this child, born into a different body, a different life, had somehow carried. In the bustling heart of 1930s Delhi, a little girl named Shanti Devi began to speak of a life no one around her had lived. She wasn't yet 5 years old when she told her parents that her real home was in Mathura, not Delhi, that her name had once been Lugdi Devi, that she had died during childbirth. Her insistence wasn't playful imagination. It was urgent, detailed, and unwavering. She remembered her husband's name, Kedarnath. She remembered the exact streets of Mathura. She spoke of her child, the clothing she used to wear, the meals she liked to cook. Her family, baffled and alarmed, initially dismissed it. But when Shanti Devi broke down crying for her other family, and her lost son, they could no longer ignore her. Word of her claims reached school officials, then politicians, and eventually the ears of Mahatma Gandhi himself. A commission of respected scholars, lawyers, and members of the public was formed to investigate. In an extraordinary journey, Shanti Devi was taken to Mathura, with no prior contact, and guided the group through winding roads and narrow lanes to the exact home she claimed as her own in her previous life. There, she met Kedarnath, the real husband of the late Lugdi Devi. He was stunned. She recognized him instantly and called him by the nickname Lugdi used. She recognized her in-laws. She knew hidden details of her former home, like where certain utensils were kept, and the layout of rooms she had supposedly never seen in this lifetime. Skeptics attempted to find flaws, but none could explain the accuracy of her memories. She remembered the conversations Lugdi had with her husband before she died, things even he had forgotten. Even more chilling, when presented with multiple children, she picked out her former son without hesitation and embraced him with a mother's instinctive grief. The commission's official report, something rare in paranormal investigations, concluded that Shanti Devi's claims matched the historical records and living witnesses beyond the realm of coincidence. No fraud, no coaching, just memory and mystery. What makes Shanti Devi's case one of the most famous reincarnation stories in India and the world is not just the credibility of her statements, but the undeniable evidence left in her path. This was not a tale whispered in private. It became a national debate. And yet, nearly a century later, no one has been able to disprove what she remembered. Her story leaves us with a haunting question. If the soul survives and memory lingers through time, how many of us are living echoes of lives already lived? In a quiet village tucked away in Uttar Pradesh, a 3-year-old boy stunned his family with a revelation no one was prepared for. He didn't just claim he had lived a past life. He claimed he had been murdered. He remembered his killer, where his body was buried, and even the weapon used to end his life. The child, unnamed for privacy, began speaking shortly after he learned to form sentences. His voice, small but confident, told an eerie tale. He said he had once lived in a nearby village, had a name entirely different from the one his parents had given him, and had been struck fatally in the head with an axe. The story was terrifying, but what truly froze everyone's blood was the vividness of the memory. The boy insisted on being taken to his old home. After much pressure, his parents agreed. They traveled with him to a neighboring village, where he instantly began giving directions. He led them to a specific house and pointed out where he had lived, identifying objects inside the home that no stranger could know. He then led the group, now including skeptical villagers and a few elders, to a field near the edge of the village. "There," he said. "That's where I was buried." Digging began. What they unearthed shocked the entire community. A decomposed skeleton, with a clear injury to the skull, lay buried just beneath the soil, exactly where the boy had claimed. Alongside it, an old axe head rusted with age. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Police were informed, and a murder investigation that had long gone cold was reopened. The child not only pointed out the house of his killer, but also recognized the man in person, still alive and still living in the same village. The accused initially denied everything, but under the weight of the evidence and the sudden attention, he eventually broke. He confessed. The boy had not only remembered his past life, he had solved the mystery of his own death. Skeptics struggled to rationalize the event. How could a child with no exposure to the crime or the area know such details? How could his words lead to a body, a murder weapon, and a confession? Some tried to dismiss it as coincidence. Others whispered darker possibilities. The story remains one of the most chilling and well-documented reincarnation cases in Indian folklore. It's not just a tale. It's an unresolved challenge to the boundaries of science and belief. If a soul can carry trauma through the veil of death and return with justice as its mission, what does that say about the force of memory or the power of truth? The coastal village of Gali in Sri Lanka is no stranger to stories from the sea. But one boy's tale stood apart, not because of waves or winds, but because he claimed to have once drowned as another man in another time. At barely 4 years old, the child spoke of ships, storms, and a tragic end that didn't belong to his current life. His parents first noticed his strange behavior when he refused to go near water. For a child growing up by the sea, this fear was odd. He would scream at the sight of the beach and tremble when rain hit the rooftops. But it wasn't just fear. He began muttering words in a dialect from a different part of the country, a dialect his family didn't speak. Then came the story. He told his parents he had once been a sailor who worked on a merchant boat traveling between Sri Lanka and India. He described storms, cargo, and a specific ship name that had no place in their village's history. He said he had drowned during a storm off the southern coast after the ship capsized. He recalled struggling in the water, gasping for breath, and watching the sky fade. The family took him seriously when he started naming fellow crew members, names no one in their area had ever heard. Desperate for answers, they contacted a retired naval historian from Colombo. The man, skeptical at first, agreed to speak with the boy. What he heard chilled him. The ship the boy described had existed, an old coastal cargo vessel that had gone down in the 1960s. The crew list matched the names the child gave. One name in particular, the boy's own claimed past name, was among the dead. That sailor had been presumed lost at sea, his body never recovered. Records showed that he had grown up in a town far from Gale and had no known connections to the boy's family. And yet, the boy described his life in that port town down to its smallest details: alleyways, harbors, taverns. But perhaps the most eerie detail was the boy's recurring nightmares. He would wake up choking, gasping for air, as if pulled back into the water each night. Medical tests revealed no respiratory problems, no trauma, no psychological disorder, just a child reliving a drowning he never should have remembered. Eventually, the nightmares faded. As the boy grew older, the memories began to fade too. Psychologists say this is common in such cases. The past slowly dims as the present takes over. But his story remains etched in the minds of those who heard it, especially the old sailor who confirmed every word. What do you say when a child recalls the last breath of a stranger who once lived, sailed, and died decades before they were born? Is it fantasy, a coincidence, or something deeper? Something echoing from life to life, anchored in memory and grief. In a quiet neighborhood of Lahore, Pakistan, a boy not yet 10 years old stunned his parents with a sentence that no child should ever say. "I was shot. Right here." He pointed to his chest with the certainty of someone reliving, not imagining, a moment of death. His parents, devout and grounded, initially dismissed it as childish fantasy. But the boy was relentless, and what followed would shake the community to its core. He began describing a former life in vivid, unsettling detail. His name, his father's shop, even the name of the street he once lived on, none of which matched his current world. He said he had worked at a textile shop in a different district, that he had a younger sister, and that he was gunned down over a business dispute. The details didn't stop there. He described his killer, a man with a scar under his left eye, always wearing a green cap, and often seen near the old market square. What began as strange bedtime talk soon spiraled into an actual investigation. His parents, growing concerned, documented his statements. Local journalists picked up the story, and one reporter, skeptical but curious, tracked down an unsolved murder case from 5 years earlier. The victim's name matched the boy's claim. So did the place of work. So did the bullet wound to the chest. The murder had gone cold. No suspects. No leads. But the boy, without being prompted, pointed to a photograph of the original victim's family and identified each person by name. He even walked through the neighborhood, one he had supposedly never visited, and guided his current parents to the exact shop where he used to work. Witnesses there remembered the murder vividly. Then came the chilling climax. The boy was shown a lineup of photographs. One of them depicted a man arrested recently for unrelated assault charges, a man with a scar beneath his left eye and a reputation for violence. Without hesitation, the boy whispered, "That's the one who shot me." Could this be coincidence? A trick? Something fed to him by others? Investigators couldn't find any links. No one in his family knew the people from the other side of the city. There were no shared acquaintances, no overlapping histories. And yet, the memories were precise, the details eerie. This is the point where viewers can't help but lean forward. If a child, unexposed to media, unfamiliar with the area, can identify a real-life killer from a life that supposedly ended before his own began, what does that say about the limits of memory and identity? Maybe reincarnation isn't just about being born again. Maybe it's about unresolved stories forcing their way into the present. Maybe some spirits refuse to rest until justice is served. And maybe, just maybe, you're not just watching a mystery. You're watching someone live twice on the southern coast of Sri Lanka, where ancient rhythms still echo through temple walls. A young boy named Nilan began tapping out traditional drum patterns before he could even speak. His family thought it was a quirk, maybe a natural talent passed down through generations. But there was just one problem. No one in his family had ever played a drum. Not his father, not his grandfather, not anyone they knew. Yet, Nilan's hands moved with the grace and precision of a seasoned master, echoing rhythms only temple-trained drummers used in sacred rituals. It was at a village festival that a visiting monk took notice. The boy, just 4 years old, sat beside the musicians, mimicking the beats on a table edge with eerie perfection. The monk froze. The style wasn't just advanced, it was old, very old, a particular kind of rhythm structure known to have been used by a temple drummer who died tragically years earlier in a fire that gutted the shrine of Mahaviharaya. When questioned, Nilan simply said, "I used to play there, before the fire." The monk, stunned, dug into temple records. Sure enough, the drummer's name had been Sarath, a man praised for his unmatched skill and dedication. Sarath had died nearly a decade before Nilan's birth, trapped inside the burning shrine as he tried to save the ceremonial drums. The connection would have remained speculative until Nilan was brought to the ruins. The child walked through the crumbled remains of the temple with a strange familiarity. He pointed to where the drums used to be kept. He knew where the hidden offerings were stored. And then, in a moment that silenced every skeptic present, he stood before the charred altar and said, "This is where I died. The fire came from behind me." Elders whispered among themselves. How could a child, born miles away, speak of details known only to former temple keepers? No one had documented the layout, yet Nilan described every corner. He even sang verses in ancient Pali, lines no one had taught him. Over time, the community began to accept what logic couldn't deny. Nilan was not just a boy with talent. He was a drummer reborn. The temple allowed him to play during major festivals, and his performances would send shivers down the spines of all who listened. Not just because of his skill, but because every beat carried the weight of another lifetime. In a land steeped in Buddhist belief, where the cycle of birth and rebirth is a core truth, Nilan's story felt like affirmation. A soul cut short had returned, not for glory or revenge, but for rhythm, for continuity, for a beat that refused to end. Reincarnation stories often speak of memory, emotion, or identity. But what if, in some cases, it's music that endures? A rhythm so deeply etched into one's spirit that even death cannot silence it. In the bustling metropolis of Karachi, where history blends with modern chaos, a 10-year-old boy named Faizan stunned his teachers one afternoon by sketching a detailed cockpit on his notebook. Not just a general airplane drawing. This was a complex flight deck of a Pakistan International Airlines Boeing 720, a model retired decades before he was born. His mother thought it was strange, but chalked it up to YouTube videos. Until the boy began having nightmares, vivid ones, about a burning fuselage, screaming passengers, and the smell of jet fuel. He'd wake up sobbing, clutching his chest, yelling the same thing again and again. "The left engine is gone! We're going down!" Disturbed by his recurring visions, his parents finally took him to a psychologist, but the sessions only deepened the mystery. Faizan recalled coordinates, radio call signs, emergency protocol terms no child would naturally know. When asked how he knew these things, he said softly, "I was the captain. We didn't make it, but I remember everything." An uncle, skeptical but curious, started researching plane crashes in South Asia. That's when they discovered the eerie match. PIA Flight 705, a scheduled flight from Karachi to Cairo that crashed during approach in 1965. Most on board perished, including the pilot, Captain Tariq Zaman. Though the investigation blamed poor visibility and miscommunication, some technical errors were never resolved. Faizan had never heard of this crash. No one in his family had discussed it. Yet he described the flight path in terrifying detail. He even identified the airport layout from that era when shown a collection of outdated blueprints. Then came the twist. When the boy was shown a photo of the ill-fated crew, he pointed straight at the pilot and whispered, "That was me." What stunned his family further was Faizan's phobia of flying. He refused to board planes. Even toy ones made him nervous. He claimed he could still feel the heat, the failure of controls, the horrifying moment when the aircraft clipped a radio tower. No media ever mentioned such specifics, yet his details matched early eyewitness reports buried in archived newspapers. As he grew older, Faizan's memories began to fade, replaced by new experiences. But his fascination with aircraft and flight mechanics persisted. Today, he avoids flying but spends his time building airplane models with intricate detail, still favoring the Boeing 720. How does a child recall a tragedy that occurred decades before his birth? Was it a coincidence or something deeper? A soul carrying the weight of an unfinished journey through the clouds. The story raised difficult questions among those who heard it. Could reincarnation preserve trauma? Is it possible that not just memories but emotional imprints, the fear, the urgency, the sense of duty, can transfer from one life to another? Faizan's account suggests something profound. Sometimes the soul doesn't just remember who it was. It remembers how it died. In a quiet village near Jaffna, Sri Lanka, a little girl named Anjali became a mystery wrapped in the skin of a child. She was just 4 when she began humming lullabies no one in her Tamil-speaking family recognized. At first, they assumed it was the babbling of a creative child. But soon, her melodies took shape. Full songs with distinct structure, haunting tones, and clear lyrics. The odd thing was, her songs weren't in Tamil, nor Sinhala, nor any language her family, neighbors, or even her school teachers could identify. When her father recorded her and sent clips to a university linguistics department in Colombo, the answer came back chilling. The child was singing in Sanskrit, an ancient, sacred language no longer spoken in daily life. Anjali, raised in a modest household with no books, no TV channels about Hindu epics, and certainly no access to Sanskrit training, somehow sang with fluency and emotion. But the linguistic mystery was just the beginning. One day, while her family visited the historic ruins of Polonnaruwa, Anjali stopped mid-walk and began crying. She pointed to a broken column and said, "This is where my father died. Right here. I used to pray for him every day." Her parents stood in stunned silence. The temple was centuries old, The ruins were scattered and half buried, yet this child seemed to know the layout without a map. Back at home, she began speaking in full sentences in Sanskrit during sleep. When translated, her words told fragmented tales of temple life, royal offerings, invaders from the north, and a terrible betrayal that ended her life. She spoke of names, rituals, priesthood duties, and the loss of a sacred fire, knowledge no one in her village possessed. Her mother started keeping a diary of her speech, and experts eventually traced some of her words to 10th century Chola-era temple practices in southern Sri Lanka. These weren't judes, saint-random religious phrases. They were specific to the duties of a temple priest's daughter. Even more bizarre, Anjali began rejecting modern clothes. She preferred hand-woven robes and asked to eat only what she called temple rice, a combination of ingredients used in ancient offering meals. The family indulged her as best they could. As years passed, she gradually lost the fluency in Sanskrit, but retained a deep emotional response to temple bells and incense. Any trip to historical ruins would bring her to tears, and she would beg to go home, to a place that no longer exists. Linguists, psychologists, and even spiritual leaders were divided on her case. Some called it genetic memory, others whispered of ancestral possession. But those who met Anjali in her early years agree. She was not just imitating, she remembered. What does it mean when a child speaks in a language they've never heard? When emotions tie them to lands they've never walked in this life? In Anjali's case, her songs were not echoes. They were a soul's cry, of a life once lived, a temple once guarded, and a truth lost to time. In the teeming city of Karachi, Pakistan, a family boarded a domestic flight in 2006, heading to Islamabad for a wedding. Among the passengers was 6-year-old Samir, quiet but curious, clutching a toy plane in one hand. But as they neared the boarding gate, Samir began to panic. He clung to his mother's leg and cried uncontrollably, screaming words that made no sense. "It's going down again. Fire in the wing. It's the same one." His parents assumed it was a child's fear of flying, but something about his phrasing unsettled them. Again? What did he mean? They tried calming him, but he refused to get on the plane. His father, under pressure, agreed to book a later flight. That decision saved their lives. The plane they were meant to board, Pakistan International Airlines Flight PK688, crashed minutes after takeoff. All 45 people on board died. The crash was attributed to engine failure and pilot error. But how did a 6-year-old know? Samir's words grew more disturbing after the tragedy. He began to describe the crash in vivid detail. The sudden tilt, the burning smell, the screams. He described how he tried to open a window that wouldn't budge. He claimed he'd been sitting in seat 12A and died when the wing exploded. Investigators later confirmed that the left wing had indeed caught fire mid-air. His memories were too precise to be coincidence. When shown images of the wreckage on TV, he pointed at the scorched fuselage and whispered, "That's where I was." Over the next few weeks, he refused to ride in any vehicle with wings. But it wasn't just fear, it was familiarity. He said things like, "Last time, the lights blinked just before it started," or, "We were told to stay calm, but the fire was already inside." The family consulted a child psychologist who believed Samir was experiencing reincarnation trauma. The doctor, baffled, said his case resembled children studied in other parts of the world who had unexplainable memories of dying in plane crashes. But Samir's recall had a unique detail. He claimed he had been on the very same route. Flight logs later confirmed that an almost identical crash had occurred in 1989 on the same Karachi to Islamabad route, involving another aircraft with wing malfunction. Had Samir been on that flight in a previous life? Even more chilling was his ability to draw cockpit instruments, label controls he'd never seen, and describe emergency landing protocols. His drawings were shared with aviation experts, who noted that they resembled the layout of a Fokker F-27 aircraft. the model used in the doomed flight. But how could a 6-year-old child, who'd never even flown before, replicate these details? Over time, his memories faded, as often happens in childhood reincarnation cases, but his story remained, a harrowing reminder of the thin veil between lives. His family never flew again, not out of superstition, but out of a haunting respect for what they'd witnessed. Samir's case closed the circle of stories in our journey, revealing a thread of memory that refuses to be cut by death. When science fails to explain, when logic falters in the face of the unexplainable, we are left with questions that stare back at us like black boxes from forgotten skies.